everyone, to the first ever episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is going to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor Theta here in the background, our local designer Norman Rafferty, and our good friend and GM RedRabbit. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience just running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. Let's go ahead and Rafferty, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for Sanguine Games. I have forgotten more about role-playing games than you will ever know. I work chiefly for Sanguine Games. Before that, I worked for Shadis Magazine, Knights of the Nerd Table, the Joe Gennaro comic strip that inspired all of this, and a couple other more dodgy things.
Right, and Red, how about you?
Hi, I am RedRabbit. I am a professional game master for the past 2.5 years at this point. I have experience playing mostly in the professional sphere, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but I'm also playing with these jokers in an Ironclaw game that I guess we should plug as well on Wednesday mornings on the Ractus channel, right? So yeah, and I'm just a lover of games and a lover of narrative design, so I'm going to be probably asking a lot of the questions and in this particular chat, but I'm looking forward to it because these guys know what they're talking about.
Remember,
that's good. We need
there are no bad ideas, just bad people.
And there's always good questions. So, to go ahead and start things off, a few months ago, I started up a Pathfinder adventure module with some friends where we got to be pirates for a bit, and it was great fun. We got to get beaten by the crew and working hard shifts, and my poor little halfling arcane, as smart as he was, had a rough deal on succeeding numerous strength, dexterity, constitution checks involved in sailing a pirate ship. But he and the party managed to overcome all this. Even managed to escape death by bleeding out behind some barrels until the blood clotted. The party became the commanders of the new ship, went to sail on a number of adventures, and then on the way back to our ship one session, we were ambushed by another crew whose captain was a wizard, and a lightning bolt took out my halfling in the first round of combat. Everyone else then died very soon after or surrendered, officially ending the module for us. When it comes... Oh, you want to say something, Graf?
No, I just said, cool story, bro.
I know. So when it comes to role-playing games, we often picture ourselves as our players as the heroes, the main characters and the protagonists around which everything revolves, and who will somehow overcome all challenges in the story, just like in all the movies, books, and shows we consume. This exceptionalism of characters often clashes against the simulation of the world as we play. We've all had times where players will miss a critical clue because they failed a roll, where they'll discover the villainous plot that they ignored actually happened because they weren't there for it, or they'll just die because a pirate wizard captain cooler than your halfling just happened to show up. So when we play role-playing games, we ultimately are attempting to emulate or represent something, and if not the real world or something approximating it, then what and why?
Oh, well, see, I'm gonna stop you right there.
Go for it.
And say that last statement that you said is a little controversial, because, like, for example, let's say you crack open World of Darkness, okay, and it will open with this is called the Storyteller system, and their major person who presides over the events is the Storyteller. And so they're saying that you're all working together to tell a common story, which is different from what you just said, where it's a bunch of events. Because this gets into what I proposed here was an axis here of where we're going about whether the players are exceptional or whether it's a world you're But anyway, about storytelling, it's like not everyone will agree with you that it's about a story. That a lot of people will tell you this is a game and that there are rules to what is going on here, and you're supposed to do the steps in order, to progress. sometimes they'll pay lip service to story, but what you just described was if you guys were the heroes of the story, they would come up with some way to make sure that the heroes somehow endured. How are our heroes going to get through this? They've got to be in the
Right.
sequel, right?
The heroes are
So,
exceptional. They'll have to survive the story somehow.
right. But role-playing games, as a rule, are extremely bad about using storytelling techniques in their text. Like you just described, when we said simulation versus exception, like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder have their roots in a war game where they expect it to be very roguelike. You rolled your
Yeah.
character randomly, who knew what you were going to get, and we were going, how far can you get? How high can you go? Can you get to level 11? We don't know.
And you
You
can
might
also
get,
see a lot of this in just the way that the rules are usually presented in a lot of RPGs, where a lot of the focus is on the combat, which is highly simulated, and then everything else, which is a lot more abstract.
yeah, like you'll often see like okay, so I'm gonna guess I can fire a shot over the bow here. Like I've complained a while about there's something that's a good idea. It's called failing forward. And it's a
Mhm.
storytelling technique that works with the idea that players are exceptional. And the idea that the story shouldn't just stop if the players fail an important role. Like if the players needed to find a book in a library, make a library use roll. Did you all fail it? Nope, y'all go home. You couldn't find the book. Or something that used to happen in D&D. You used to have to roll to find doors or even to open doors. Well, if you go to the first door and all of you fail to roll to open it, we're done. You can't get in. The store's locked.
Right,
It's
and maybe in a
impossible.
realistic sense, it's not entirely impossible. A person tries to do something, fails, and then gives up and goes home. But that's not an exciting game to play. And if you have 4 or 5 people at a table to do it, and that happens, it's like, well, I guess we all just wasted our time, right?
Right. So fail forward is a philosophy that grew out of that, which is that even though our characters can have setbacks, we should still be making forward progress because we're exceptional and we want a story to be told. And I think that's a very good movement to have. But you just described in your Pathfinder story one of the problems with this, which is
Mhm.
fail forward is for some reason like confined to anything that isn't combat.
Mhm.
Because
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't think anyone is saying, okay, if the players all die in the combat, we should just kind of do a do-over and have everybody not be dead. I mean, is anyone actually saying that?
I don't think so. And when it comes to like the theoretical consequences of a fight, everyone could die, and you can't really fail forward out of death, right? That seems like the
Okay.
narrative way
Well,
to deal
I
I
with it
mean,
mean,
most of the time.
like, what's your experience with that, Red?
so so in my mind, I think because I am petrified of those situations of the total party kill, right? When I plan for encounters, and of course, lots of encounters you're not going to plan for as they kind of come up naturally at the table. But when I am planning them, I always keep in mind what happens, what's the fail state, you know? And very rarely is that ever game over. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, right? So they can be captured. Perhaps they're just being robbed. Maybe it's a situation where I don't know. You have like some sort of maybe rather than killing them, these characters get maimed. I mean, there's a lot of tricks and there's a lot of things that you can look up about that. But
While I agree with you, there's a lot of tricks. That's not what's presented in the books.
oh, that's true.
Like if
Generally.
you get D&D or Pathfinder, I'm sure like on page 395 or something like that, they describe ways to get players out of it. But that's after you've read all this challenge rating, these monster write-ups, not to mention all these monsters that have make this roll, and if you fail it, you're instantly killed.
Mhm.
Um, all of this text that's presented. And then like the modern iterations of D&D 5, monsters can do a hell of a lot of damage. Some of them can do enough to take out your entire hit points in a single hit, like especially at first and second level.
Mm.
So, it's presented in a way. And this is what I get into, which is like when we talk about exceptionalism and storytelling, if the role-playing game is supposed to be some sort of storytelling exercise, they're not giving the games are fighting the game masters on this. They're instead of giving you a lot of tools, to work with this. they're giving you a game that's incredibly lethal, has very rigid combat rules of when stuff happens, requires you to understand a lot of these kinds of numbers, and then everybody dies. Now there are exceptions to this, like because the big exceptions to this, I think, are Spirit of the Century, which I guess eventually turned into Fate Accelerated, and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which gave you some games give you fate points or something like that that are get out of death free cards and that sort of thing. But for the most part, but we've gone like now we're getting into storytelling stuff. What originally I was going to talk about.
Well, storytelling is half of it. I mean, it sets up
Well,
the examples, but continue.
the original theory, this originally came up in our Joe Gennaro on zine that we did a couple of years ago, which was the idea of simulation versus exception, which is the core question of who are the rules for? If you play a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, the same combat rules apply to the monsters that apply to you. If you have a sword, it does, short sword does 1d6 plus dex. If the kobold has it, it does 1d6 plus dex. You have hit points, they have hit points. You have saving throws, they have saving throws. You have access to these spells, they have access to the same spells. So that's more of a universal or simulation going on here, because if I know how magic missile works for me, I know how magic missile works for the cobbled sorcerer when the cobbled sorcerer shows up and uses it on me. So, I know if I know armor, chainmail gives me armor class 15, it also gives the hobgoblin leader armor class 15. So by learning, these rules are, simulate a world. And the more I learn about these rules, the more I know about the world. Okay, this is the opposite of what we're going to call exceptionalism, which is the idea that rules are only for players. Players are the things that exist and other characters don't exist. Now, you see this in games like Powered by the Apocalypse or Blades in the Dark, where players make all the rolls. Monsters exist maybe as progress clocks or, like ticks on the meter, or just as a thing. Like this is a threat. If you can roll 10 or better, you can deal with the threat.
Right, and it's about the players dealing with it, not necessarily the threat directly trying to do things. It does things as it needs to in a lot of the Powered by the
it does
Apocalypse
things as
games.
it needs to, and there's not a big pressing reason to learn how the rules work, because like I know if I'm playing Powered by the Apocalypse, 10 or better gets me what I want. So that's all I need to know. I don't need to know how the enemy's weapons work, or if they're girded up, or what distance they are, or other issues with that. I just need to say I'm going to do something, and then I roll dice, and what's in front of me says it. There's nothing to learn. I don't need to learn that beholders are a type of aberration who have an anti-magic field with a certain art. None of that matters, because that's not really going, we're not going to have big tactics or effects or stuff that's layered or challenge ratings to puzzle through or whatever. So
there's still a little bit of that remaining at the very least. Like there's still the creation of excuses so that you can get like bonuses to your own personal role, I think. But it's less mechanically essential, and it's more storytelling at that point.
Well, I even say more stylistic. You need to learn what your GM thinks is good and what they don't. Like a classic argument we had in OSR gaming is, can you dodge a bullet? Because for many years in the 80s and 90s, like you'll read these role-playing games, it's like, you can't dodge a bullet. That's ridiculous. No, you can't dodge. The Matrix made a big deal about, no, you need superpowers to dodge a bullet. So, for many years, it was like if you just pulled the trigger on a gun and made a single roll, you hit whoever it was with the bullet and just died. Call of Cthulhu is still like that.
I think the fight's still going on to this day, honestly.
Well, but that would be that means that you're spending more time talking about stylistic tastes, and even then, I mean, I guess we like to bring this back to the discussion. There's also the question of speaking of simulation versus exceptionalism, should the players have an elevated status to do things in the game that normal people shouldn't be allowed to do? Like, should bullets kill non-player characters? The player character should get to dodge them.
Right. And I think in a social sense, that's actually the premise of a whole lot of games, right? Like your players are, in fact, elevated people who have the authority to go do something that they're doing.
Are they?
Even a basic adventure technically has more authority than the random farmer.
Not in Dungeons and Dragons or
Not,
Pathfinder. You just have
not
like
in a very
infinite hit
direct
points.
sense, but in kind of a more social sense. Like
Okay.
the adventurers are empowered to go handle the problem. The farmer isn't expected to.
You
What
know,
do you?
I agree, honestly. I think that, and maybe this is sort of a selling point or a hook for a lot of these games. It's what people need to feel empowered. It makes me think of a system that I picked up a long time ago and never played anything in it. It's Esper Genesis, which was sort of like, hey, we're going to take the 5e core rule set and make a dramatic sci-fi game out of it.
Of
And
course.
the reason I mention it, I feel like maybe one of the only times this game is going to be mentioned out of its own context here. But the reason I mention it is something that stood out to me specifically was that the players were playing these spacefaring adventurers, so they had power armor and guns and psychic abilities and all of this stuff, but they were all affected by this mineral or something that gave them superpowers. And it stood out to me. I was like, why is it that they need to, on top of all this other cool space tech, on top of being space pirates and military leaders and psychics and stuff, they also have to have these superpowers? And it could have been just a way for them to map the power system from 5e better, like there's no magic in this system, so we need to give these guys something special. But I think that it has to do with this idea that everyone wants to feel right out the box like they're unique, like, well, like the exceptionalism thing, like they have different rules. They don't have to worry about 90% of the people they're going to meet because they're just going to be better than them for whatever the reason.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I think to use another example of that, the whole World of Darkness, especially vampire game, is written in such a way where you're supposed to be a really cool and rare vampire, and being a vampire is cool. It makes you sexy. You're not a horrible monster at all. You look sexy. You stay young forever. Your wealth. You're part of this elite cabal that supports your bizarre fluid draining activities.
Your
Um,
magic vampire powers even return your haircut when you go to sleep.
yeah.
That is literally in the book.
But oh god. Yeah, I mean it really fluffs you up. But also what I mean by exceptionalism is the idea of, like, when I talk about simulation, I'm asking, are you living in a world where the same, where what I know about the rules also governs what other people are capable of? Like if I was playing vampire and I heard that somebody busted into a 13th floor office and stole a file but didn't show up on the cameras, I would know that, well, if you were a vampire with potence and celerity, you could move, climb the outer walls and get in and get out before anything would detect you. But I know that because I know the vampire rules, and I know that potence and celerity are two abilities someone could buy in the rules to do this. That's a simulation. I know more about the world and I know more about the rules that apply to it. Whereas if we were talking about a more sort of like exceptionalist game, we get into the category of the GM. The GM just said they did it. So, I mean, I was using as my example of that the variety of D&D adventures like Lost Caverns of Sajkamp, which have walls that are immune to pass wall. Like if you brought spells like pass wall or dig or dimension door or all these variety of spells that allow you to bypass walls, there would be these walls of, nope, this wall is immune to all of that. They just wrote it down. They didn't say right. They didn't say why. They just said all of that. And that's kind of like an exceptionalist thing of, well, we don't want this to be too easy for the player. So we told them they had abilities that, could make this easier, and then took those abilities away because it would make it too easy. Because once again, it's not a world that has consistent rules to it. It's a player experience. And thus, like, this is taking the attitude that anything that makes the player experience better or more suitable to what we want to do is acceptable. It's exceptional. You can change whatever you want. Like other people don't matter, or rules are just so we can have this experience right now. And I get why that's a lot easier, because I've had people fight me on this over whether it should be too easy. But the issue I have with that is you're basically telling players to stop asking questions. If nothing if everything is about like the experience and none of it is about the emergence of what this world is like and what all this lore does, then there's no reason to learn anything, because like it changes on a whim.
Right, and with, like, the D&D example, like, it wouldn't be bad if it was just outright said, like, "This is an exceptionalist, sort of game. There's just going to be problems that come up, and you have more room to, like, vary in your powers." But it kind of lies to you, doesn't it?
Well,
Hmm.
That's the main problem there. It lies to you about what's happening because if it was a simulation where you could understand the world, like with our vampire example, then you have a better grasp on how you can tackle problems, what you're going to face, and you can make logical assumptions about things that are happening and put things together. But when you have the exceptional situation, it's more based on narrative, but when you pretend to be one and actually are the other, everyone gets confused, and you do end up in that scenario where it's like, stop asking questions. I'm just running my game.
So I think there's something else going on here too, because um, I think in many ways D&D wants to be a more simulation game, less of an exceptional game. But I think that, like what Rafferty said, it is a double-edged sword, and there's a point at which the complexity can bite you if you're trying to build a simulated universe, and suddenly you find yourself in a place where the options are so varied and so mind-bogglingly complex that people could, oh yeah, sorry, you could just teleport out of this dungeon. Well, okay, so the Undermountain doesn't have teleportation is not possible in the Undermountain, or these pass walls don't work. And I think that that's probably less of a, I don't think that came from a place of exceptionalism of trying to make it easier for the person running the game. I think it probably came from it's making it easier for the person writing the game, because there's no way that they could account for every spell in the book and every spell that's going to be added in all of the additions that will be made to the book, as the game goes on. And so they start taking these shortcuts because the simulation is starting to cave under its own weight.
well, see, and this is where I would fight that by saying, like, it's one of my favorite, questions to ask is, how do we kill Superman? Which is like, if you were Lex Luthor, okay, then and you for some reason you have to fight Superman. Superman can do anything. Okay,
Mm.
well, you don't get to rewrite the rules of the universe so Superman can't win. You don't get to do that. And there's been decades of stories about Lex Luthor, you know, thwarting Superman up to and including killing him at least once.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and uh that's a question. Like, I remember, like, the original, see, we're also in a paradox here because people talk about how much they love the Elder Scrolls Morrowind computer game, because the people who made
Mm.
Morrowind were very much inspired by tabletop RPGs. Now, in Morrowind, you could kill important characters, and then the end quest of the game becomes unsolvable. So
Right.
in forward games, because they thought of that, they just made certain NPCs invincible.
I think
And
that, yeah, that does kind
Right,
of
which is
sum
a
it
bit
up,
of
right?
backtracking because they want to make sure the casual player like actually sees the end of the game,
right,
which frequently they probably don't.
which has led to the other thing of, you can just, if you know someone's important to the plot, you can bring them with you on a mission because they can't be killed.
Hmm.
Which is hilarious. But more to the point,
Mhm.
I know. I mean, I'm sympathetic. I know that GMs can't necessarily plan for everything, but uh, it's really, I think that the GMs should be. I really want to get away from plotting everything as story. It's like, this is important to the story. What the hell is a story? Story is a meta concept or an abstract concept. If
Mhm.
you were role playing, when you start a role playing game, I, as a player, almost always, there's exceptions, I almost always control a character. Like, I'm a character object in this world, and I'm supposed to react to that. Other things in the world that react to me should also be characters. And so if I just breeze through a problem because I've got a second level spell like Dimension Door, and just like bypass a solution to a problem, any enemies or forces should react to what I did, you know, based on
Mm.
what I just did, because that's a thing. Because like I'm not saying necessarily that people can't enjoy games like that. I can talk later about what I've been calling performative role play. When you
Hmm.
see people on the streams who are being highly directed towards a goal, they're still having a blast and having a lot of fun, but they're not about making new storylines or like diverging from the path or anything like that, or shaking anything down. They're there to be entertaining in the moment and to quip wise and to make what's going on right now feel important. They're not about emergence and new ideas going on, like, or making something unexpected happen. And that's why,
Right.
like, I would argue that you have to set some ground rules, and then we have to roll with the ground rule. There have to be some rules that apply to both players and NPC. There'd be concepts of mortality, nobility, law, social situations. There has to be something that applies to everyone. So that way I can react to NPCs and what they're doing, or do things myself and realize there'll be repercussions. Otherwise, we're just here to have a feel good time, which I guess is not bad. It's just we should acknowledge that up front, because I think games like D&D and Pathfinder, since they're written by multiple people, on the one hand, you're supposed to be an adventurer and where the same rules apply to you that apply to the kobolds and the hobgoblins. On the other hand, you're not supposed to die at first level, and the traps aren't supposed to be too easy. So we're supposed to lie about those, and that's a huge mixed message.
I kind of want to know how Griff feels about this as a game runner, specifically because it's interesting to me that I think a lot of this that you're talking about is done in the service of making games that are fun for players and also accessible for game masters. But the way you talk about it, I do realize that I prefer a simulation. I like a game that has a world to explore and rules that make sense within their own context, and that I can apply the things that I've learned about my character to the rest of the world. I think that's really cool. But I think that does make it very challenging sometimes you get into the pass wall scenario. It can be very challenging as a game runner to account for these things. And that's where I think the real skill in running games comes from, is in learning how to use the setting tools to improvise. I'm getting back to it, Griff. I'm sorry, because I just thought about another thing you said.
You'll get to the question eventually, I know.
Yeah. But I do think this is interesting that, because we had just been talking about how, or I had brought up personally, that sometimes the players have so many options, it's impossible for the game master to keep up with it. But ultimately, the game master has more power than they ever will. And that is something that is written into a lot of the books, is this knowledge that, hey, rule number 1, have fun. Rule number 2, the game master is always right? And I've heard a lot of players say that too. People want someone who's ultimately in charge so that they don't have to worry and they don't have to get into arguments over that stuff. Anyway, but to go back to what I was going to say to you, Griff, do you think you prefer approaching games from a exceptionalist perspective, or do you prefer preparing games via a simulation? What do you think is easier to do and more fun for you?
I think, to go back a couple seconds, when it comes to what's the story in a game, you do have the fun stuff that happens as you play the game. What's the word again, Rafferty? I forgot the word already. I keep forgetting every time. Emergence.
I'm
That's
using this is the word that came out of Elder Scrolls. Emergence. Stuff that comes out of play that we didn't plan for.
Right. So emergence is one part of what we could call story, and then what the DM tries to plan ahead for is the other part of the story. And I think that when you end up trying to run a game, what probably matters more is being ready for those emergent things and understanding how to kind of improv on. And part of preparation, a lot of people focus on this side of the story where they're this is my narrative. These are the things that are going to happen in this order. And the players are going to definitely go along with my plan and choose to become the Yonti prisoners, giving up all their possessions and items for the chance 3 weeks down the line after being tortured that they may have an opportunity to strike at their foe. It's no, that never works. What you do is you need to focus on the world, which you have to simulate a bit in your own mind, but you focus more on in terms of the individual characters, their motivations, what their individual plans are. And then when the piece players interact with them, you can go, okay, so this character got interrupted here. They're still motivated to do something. Their next step is now obvious because I understand what they are. And when you have a simulated rule set and you can say, I already grasp what things they're capable of, then suddenly you can take on the persona of those characters and say, all right, I'm this character. I have these hammers. Where are my nails? And you can
Yeah,
just
no, I mean,
improv your story out from that. So the
well,
simulation manner of handling it, I think, is probably better in general for trying to like prep a game, at least
Mm.
as a game master.
well, I mean, I want to build on that because I've gamed with these people, so I'm kind of biased. But
Yeah.
like we're biased towards the more kind of like political machinations games. Like I'm curious what De La Vega, or the criminal enterprises like Mr. Wonderful, like when we're
Mhm.
to quote some games I've been in. Like I'm curious about what other, when I'm playing the game, I want to feel like the NPCs are up to something and I want to go ahead and solve it. In order for that to work, it's got to be it's got to be simulation driven where the NPCs are doing things. And you can see this in some games where they'll make like a clock and you say put tick marks
Mhm.
on this, or put a tick mark on this. Wonderful gets closer to his scheme of destroying the city with acid, or or Sirocco get whatever.
Yeah.
Like so that gives players, that's formalizing the idea that time is moving forward. That's an excellent tool for that.
I
Um,
agree. It definitely
yeah,
is.
Griffin, you brought up like kidnapping, like capturing player characters is almost impossible because players like insist, I'm the hero, I'm an exception.
Mhm.
Getting captured would be surrender, and that would be losing. And nothing is worse than losing.
At
Mm.
that
Many
point, you're
players,
obviously no longer exceptional either. Your whole fiction is broken. I thought I was the hero, and now I'm
well, you could,
captured. What bullshit is
right.
this?
Well, what I mean by exceptionalism is like, well, what I always going to egregious me is when we said something earlier, which is, well, why wouldn't they? What if they capture you instead of killing you? And
Mhm.
I've heard that that's an exceptional theory, but then we're playing D&D where it's like, look, the carrion crawlers are not going to kidnap us. The carrion
Fair point.
crawlers are going to eat us.
Very
Where
true.
half the things you meet in the game don't want this came up during I remember Mouse Guard, where in Mouse Guard, when you met a threat, you were supposed to compromise. I said, well, this is a giant snake, so it wants to eat all of you. So I suppose it's a compromise, it could eat one of you.
Uh,
Mm.
and I think Arcloid here in the chat actually brings up like a decent point here. Like capturing allies, irregulars, and other NPCs is usually easier than trying to do it to the ECs because one, you can forget about the rules and throw them out the window and do it anyway, and two, it feels less like failing for the players,
Oh,
and it gives them the ability to fail forward and still have a
I
consequence
mean,
for whatever happened.
we could do a whole thread on like what I like to talk about Superman, because everybody will tell you, oh, Superman's a boring character. By the way, he's been around for 80 years. So you're right.
Nobody likes him, yeah.
You can do things to NPCs. Like you see this in stories all the time. Because someone was just recently joking about how on Star Trek, it's the red shirts that always get killed. But we can't kill Kirk. He's the main character. He's not going to die. He's going to be in the episode next week. But we can kill someone next to him as a storytelling technique, as a simulation to show you this is a mortal
Mhm.
threat. Because if I just talk all day about how dangerous this is, you don't believe me. We
Yeah,
actually
someone
kill
picks up
someone.
Worf and throws him across the room.
Yeah, if we kill someone in front of you, okay, we're no arguing. Someone just died. But yeah, and that gets into whether you expect the players to be emergent. Like I always point out D&D's Tyrant Queen as an example of the evil dragonborn show up and start terrorizing the town, and the adventure just assumes you'll throw in with the heroes. Like as soon as the heroes show up, it's like you're going to ally with them, and they trust you and they send you on missions, despite the fact you were literally just loser first level characters, some of whom might be evil.
Now,
Right.
just on that topic, you can't win that adventure as a group of first level players. It's probably designed in that way, but you probably will die if you try to do two things.
Well, if you try to go,
Like the 8 it gives.
it what was my issue with it was that the people who wrote it and published it and got paid money for it didn't have any provisions
Mhm.
for what would happen if you did anything else other than what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
I see this in a lot of published adventures where they assume that as soon as you start the path, you'll do everything they already said. And
Mhm.
that not every adventure is written that way. Like the people give Palladium a lot of crap for riffs, but a lot of the riff stuff has text in it of if your players go off the rails and do something crazy, because this is freaking riffs. I don't know if you guys ever played riffs.
I know a little
haven't,
bit about it.
unfortunately.
Haven't played
Right.
it.
I
though.
mean, Rifts is a crazy game. So the people who wrote it said, "You guys might do anything," and then they
Yeah.
have like just a couple sentences just devoted to what if they do something we haven't thought of. Here are some ideas, and the better adventures that I'll keep quoting are the ones that have like little notes of if they run off the rails and do something weird, um, you know, you can do it. And I mean, I would suggest that that makes for like what when people are complaining about the Mercer effect, which is that no offense to Matt Mercer, the critical when they complain about I saw a streamed game and it looked more fun than my game. That's because the people who are streaming know that they're playing a very exceptionalist and linear game, and they are professional actors who have been hired and put up there to improv. And the way you improv is you stay on a very linear track and you only make little tiny jokes or little tiny asides, but not too much to rock the boat. That's actor training to make that seem fun and improvised while still going along with the flow.
Right.
Um,
The improv motto is yes, and you take what
right.
is already there and you build on top of it.
Right. And that can be a lot of fun. But the reason why people like someone watches that and they get to their gaming table and go, why aren't my gamers like this? No one told them that. Dungeons and Dragons told them they could build any character they wanted, and then told them it was a world of imagination and gave them all these crazy abilities, including trap abilities like pass wall, dimension door, charm person, all this kind of stuff that's not supposed to actually do anything, and told them they could go off and do all these things. So really, if you want your game, I'm just asking the question, if we want our game to be more like streamed games, we should write them to be more like streamed games.
But at the same time, that's maybe the less interesting way to actually play them, as just a group of friends coming together to just play a game and have fun and see what happens.
Well, I mean-
and see, I don't know. I don't know if people actually like I have much bigger topics to talk about. What do people actually want about games? Not
Yeah.
everybody wants emergence.
Right.
No, it's
It
very
really
true.
depends on your crowd and your friends and, understanding them and their wants.
The problem is that I think the emergence, the things that you get from simulation gaming aren't readily apparent when you're watching it as an observer, and that's what I think is the core of the Mercer effect, as you said, is people think that the goal of these games is to create really interesting stories that are interesting to witness, and they don't really understand all of the things that you can get out of playing a game that is more emergent and is more simulation based.
I would agree maybe that's going on, but I mean, if we were doing a review, like there's plenty of times where Matt Mercer will just start narrating for 10 or 15 minutes and everyone just accepts what he says, and they'll even do die rolls to cover people's skill rolls for them. I'm not saying that it's a bad style, but I'm saying if you watch that, you can see he's a director, and also he's an actor, and he's working with other actors who've been trained to do professional improv. So I don't know if the people who are up there are going along with the flow because they want to, or if they're going because they're paid to do this. So at some level they're paid. So at some level that does color what they do, and but also I mean this might be what they came for, but it's what they're doing, and that's kind of like while I'm sure people will quote in the comments, stuff like that, their favorite moment where something unexpected happened in a streamed game, and I'm sure it does. Like I want to emphasize that
Someone can tell a
exceptionalism,
really good joke no one thought was coming.
right? And I want to emphasize this is
That's
a
mean,
sliding
Griff.
curve. I think Harmon Quest is the bigger example of that because Harmon Quest has the outtakes where they discuss in great detail like what they because Harmon Quest is edited, so when they stream it, they're leaving out all the arguments they have.
Yeah.
Whereas Critical Role, it's much more smooth and authoritarian. But I think that's what everybody knows. And basically what I'm just saying here is the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think there's not a lot of discussion over like how special the players are. Because I mean, like everyone jokes about how they go to taverns and get in brawls or tries to do spares or go to weapon shops and are basically Grand Theft Auto style characters that wander around and do whatever they want. But then you'll also run into stories like Tyrant Queen or Dragon Heist are two big ones I look at, which are supposed to be serious and dramatic storylines where you're participating in an event larger than you and has things falling apart. But in order for that to work, at some level, you need to be immersed as a character in a larger world where
And
your
not just be
successes,
the biggest one there.
yeah, and your successes and failures have consequences, not just for you, but for other people. If it's going to constantly be failing forward, then my and you can't really ruin things by doing things badly, then you can't ruin things and there's no stakes. We're going to get to the end of Tyrant Queen no matter what we do.
Mhm.
So this is an interesting thing because we're using D&D as our test bed for a lot of this stuff. D&D, and I think, presents itself as a simulation game, but as we've said, a lot of the adventure modules are written in very sort of linear fashions. And even though the characters seem empowered in a lot of ways, it takes a lot to actually change the status quo for the party, right? Like,
Mhm.
you can take a beating, you can die, and come right back from death in many cases. For you to actually, usually the only way your characters are changing are when you level up, and that's because they're getting better, or when you get a new magic item, they're getting better. And so I wonder if there's any value in these games in maybe empowering or writing into the story ways that the characters actually change in negative ways that failure is mechanical. It doesn't stop the
Mhm.
game. It shows people that there is life after the TPK, maybe metaphorically, or after the failed event, in a way that's still fun and interesting. And so the thing I'm thinking about here, and we also talked about vampire, right? Because I'm in a vampire game right now too.
Mhm.
And one of the key differences that I think is very intriguing in Vampire is that the characters are empowered to do things that can completely upset the narrative basically whenever. In a game
Right.
we played, we were not an inconsequential. They were trying to butter up a vampire elder to help them, and this vampire elder was starving, so they were going to help them by giving them one of their blood bank guys, essentially. And this elder killed the blood bank guy, and everyone felt really bad about that. And then they said, "Hey, we could embrace this character. We could turn them into a vampire." And it's like, well, that's against the rules. But it's against the rules of their society, not against the rules of the game. And they
Exactly.
basically made a vampire. And now all of a sudden, the story is no longer about working with this elder vampire who they had already kind of burned their bridges with. But the story became, hey, what's it like to welcome a new baby vampire into the world? And that's huge. That's dynamic changing. And that doesn't really exist so much in the structure of D&D. Most of those rules
Right.
we spoke about in D&D are
And,
about
Mhm.
changing hit point values, which can always be changed back.
But you
I'm
used to
gonna
get
be
some followers, and you could ignore them or send them into traps. But yeah,
right, and I'm
you
going to
don't
be
really feel invested in them.
a nattering negative nabob here and point
Yeah.
out, like, okay, so you just went from don't have enough blood to support this elder vampire to now we have an elder vampire and a new vampire who also needs 30 more blood bank victims
Mm-hmm.
to support his blood habit. So you just raise the entire blood requirements. That would have a ripple effect. And I would argue that if that has a ripple effect of now we have to drain even more blood for the community without being discovered, that would be a simulation. I'm going to be
Mm.
cynical and say my personal experience is there's never any problem harvesting blood. Then this would be very exceptionalist where we just add him as another vampire and the question of where he gets his blood never comes up.
Hmm.
Well, I can tell you that is not how we're playing.
Right. So
The question of this character needs, right? They run away. They hate the vampire that killed them, but they also kind of hate the party who put
yeah,
them in that
we were
situation
playing
in
in
the
a
first
group game.
place. Yeah. But that's in some ways almost a fail state that made things a lot more interesting, which is why I think it's a good example. Even if you look at it from a simulation perspective, it does make the game a lot more interesting and in ways that no one could have predicted going in.
Yeah. Something emerged that was interesting from just a rule that was there and then applied to the situation you were
Right.
in.
Well, and the
And
fact
in
that
D&D, it's
your GM is actually letting you do this, because I have a criticism with Vampire as being very status quo. Because if
mm,
you the Vampire got a joke, became a joke in its hit lore, where
mhm,
everything was caused by vampires, Inquisition caused by vampires,
yep.
Chechnya massacre caused by vampires, JFK assassination caused by vampires, and they have a masquerade, but it's been going on for years, and nothing you can do can really upset it. Like there's still all the 12 clans, or 7 clans, or 5 clans, whatever many clans they have now after the
Mhm.
last retcon, and this will always ever thus it will always be like this. And so you go on these little side adventures where There's never anything presented as a thing that could upset Vampire Clan. There's a joke in
You're
World of
protecting the
Darkness.
status quo, maybe.
Yeah, because there's a joke in World of Darkness where they say, "Don't cure AIDS." They would order the designers to include there that you're not allowed to cure AIDS.
What a weird thing to put in.
Apparently,
There's a lot of weird things in that book, man.
Well,
Yeah.
I know why that's in there because one of their players said, "I just bought, Academics 5 and Craft 5. I'm going to make a vaccine that cures AIDS."
But the way he presents it to you is like, if you're at that point, you're a worldwide level intelligence. You can do whatever you want.
That's if you were going by that and then rolled a bunch of dice and then said they did it. And this pissed off a GM who said this is supposed to be a realistic game. You can't just cure AIDS because they were
someone in the real world trying to.
That they were being blithe about it and said, so they put that in there because that's an example they knew about. But the weird thing is after they say don't cure AIDS, the very next sentence says, but it's okay to cure vampirism. If someone comes up with a cure for vampirism, that would be okay in your game. And they just left that there without realizing that is if that happened, that would completely upset your game. Because
I think this is probably tangential to like appropriating real life for fun, like we were talking about before. It's taking a serious issue and then making light of it.
Yeah, because like speaking of exceptionalism versus simulation, that would upset the status quo. If we could cure vampirism, then there would be people out there who say, I don't think getting our vital fluids sucked out without our consent is a good thing. What if we just stopped you from doing that rather than killing you? And like that would totally upset and change all of the lore. But that was listed as something that was okay. But helping regular people is not.
I think I found my point because this whole time we're talking, and I think I'm on board. I think we all have a fondness for the simulation approach, but this is the first time where I realized that maybe I am team exceptionalism in a certain sense, in like a storytelling sense, because to me, whenever I'm looking at something like that, I'm looking at the ripple effect it has from a narrative perspective, and that is always going to be what attracts me. Like, I like the simulation because I think it generates story when your failures have consequences, and I really like that about role-playing games. It's separate from just telling stories around a campfire. But if you told me like, oh yeah, there's a cure, you can make a cure for vampirism in a vampire game, suddenly the ramifications of that are so far-reaching that it's kind of exciting. Like, I want to
clarify. Game. I started using the word universal instead of simulation. I want to clarify that's like exceptionalism is where only the player experience matters. So exceptionalism would be if we could cure AIDS and vampirism, but nothing else changed.
Right. Okay. So yeah, and I disagree with that.
Because we want to keep the same thing. And that's the bad side of it. There's good things to these approaches, but the bad side to it is, where nothing we do actually can change the status quo, because changing the status quo would ruin all my source books. It would, and also some GMs just don't want that to happen. I like the fact that Elminster is cool and does everything awesome. Like, your character can't be more awesome than Elminster. So I bring one of the bus. I don't know why I'm doing that, but like those are the bad sides to that. And I think at the end of the day, it is the players who are having the central stuff. But if you want to have a serious game where people are, I guess it's the big paradox me to get involved in the lore. We have to be able to affect the lore, because if the lore is just a passive thing that sits over us, then I'm not involved with it. It's just something that happens to me.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, I think status quo blows it wide open for me. It's this idea that, like, moment to moment, nothing, the story isn't really changing. You're getting to make choices within it, but you're never worried that the status quo is going to change in a major way. And the D&D adventures are written that way. And I think a lot of that means, like, the only thing that could change the status quo is failure in those contexts, right? And failure is to be avoided because that's not fun. Well, so maybe that's the danger of it.
We might also do something that, it's not just failure that might do that. We might also do something that wasn't expected. Like, one of my favorite D&D encounters is, there's this goofy adventure that has a lot of dumb choices in it, but one of them is you're in a desert and you get in a fight with a dryad. And like, immediately we just said, okay, this is a desert, but you're a dryad. which means you need a tree to survive. It's like, yep, the tree's right over there. Okay, but you're in the desert.
Maybe it's a cactus.
It's a tiny oasis.
Well, no, it's a tiny oasis. It's there. It's a tiny oasis. It's in the desert. So he said, listen, lady, we're not here to kill you. We're here to go do something in the mine, the opposite of a forest. A place where sun doesn't shine. So here's the deal. We're going to walk right through your grove and not touch a thing, and you're going to leave us all alone.
Yeah,
it seems too reasonable to be true.
Like, I love that. But in the module,
I mean, what I'm getting at is the guy who wrote the adventure. You would think that the guy who wrote the adventure would put a little line in there saying, okay, the Dryad, might actually listen to diplomacy because they're not actually an obstacle, nor do they have any investiture in stopping us because they're not involved. They're not involved in what's going on in the mine. They are just here. So you think like it would some point it would occur to them to just write that in there, but the adventure, like our GM was good enough to roll with that. But that's kind of what I'm talking about, where the people often I'm running into the people who are writing this are thinking like computer game authors, where they're just supposed to populate a raid and with it, monsters that you can't
here's the next monster you're supposed to fight. I pulled it out of the book at random,
Yep.
Yeah, we just put dryads in here for some reason, and it was like and also there might be some GMs who would resent this. This is the path. You're supposed to be challenged. You're supposed to get into this, but it's like, I mean, that's why I want to get back to really early days of role-playing games, where if you dig through the Dungeons & Dragons first edition, there were reaction rules in the game. That there were language rules in the game and reactions, so you could meet monsters and reason with some of them, because the monsters didn't want to die either. So if you ran into a bunch of bugbears or trolls, you might be able to look at each other and just go, hey, and either like walk past each other or even barter goods or something. And a lot of that, I'm blaming the rise of video games and that kind of stuff. A lot of this is being treated, and I was recently complaining about how many monsters are clearly labeled deserves to die. So a lot of the stuff being presented that monsters throw themselves at you in a suicidal fashion, and that's exceptionalism, where you'll run into kobolds and orcs and goblins and bugbears, all of which have a lot of lore, all of which are sentient, they have language, they have society, they have all this kind of stuff, but for some reason they want to throw themselves on adventurer swords and die, because what's their end game here? To rob you of your crap?
Yeah, they're all robbers and thieves, which gets incredibly racist when you start to think about it.
And what are they going to steal from you? They often have better loot than you have.
That's certainly a bigger conversation.
That's like a whole topic in itself. But I think
that's also part of what I'm talking about. Like, exceptionalism is when you override the simulation for what you want to happen, because I want this to happen as an exception to what might realistically happen. And I know people will debate, well, what's realism or not? Most people don't want to die. Bugbears, kobolds, and orcs are people. They, even animals don't want to just, commit suicide. They have some sort of end game in mind. So, if you get used to that, like I've been in games where I'm the only one asking questions, like maybe we should talk to the kobolds before we slaughter them, and other people saying, no, it's a game. We kill things for experience points. Huzzah! And and they're not wrong to say that. The adventure is backing them up on it. I'm just going to say that if people want their games to be more mature, we have to start asking this question of, well, what does this mean? Is it supposed to be some sort of weird fantasy land where we kill puppets, or are we looking for something that feels more like, if we're going to complain that orcs and stuff are being represented as stereotypes, then you're asking for a simulation.
Yep. And so to go back just 1 second and end this out with one last question for everyone. So we've been ragging pretty hard on exceptionalism for a bit, but you just recently brought up things like monster languages and other things. So what's some of the bad part of simulation? When is there too much simulation, like the equipment loads, or I think is infamous and like we've mentioned a few times amongst ourselves, the way you could just die in character generation in Traveler or something. What's your favorite terrible simulation rule?
First things first, I want to stand up for encumbrance rules. I won't go into it, but hey, I fight for encumbrance. But
Well,
please,
what's your
please
favorite
continue.
worst one then? Is that actually your favorite?
What's the worst part? I think the worst part we mentioned right up at top, which is pass wall invulnerable barriers and things. I
Mhm.
think my problem with the simulation is when it gets too unwieldy and complex
Mhm.
to the point where no one can keep up with all of it. And so everyone is writing their adventures paranoid that, someone's going to stroll up with speak with dead and solve the entire mystery by just talking to the dead body. And so, they have to write in all of these addendums and things. So I think it's just a matter of how ungainly it can be. I think Vampire's a great example of a game that it's got a bunch of powers in it, but not anything compared to D&D. And when you see someone who is, when you see someone who's invisible, when you see someone who can climb on walls, well, you know what they're doing. That's the beginning and end of the conversation because
Mhm.
it works across the board.
Or
So
a better example would be when
And
you
your
you go to
example.
interrogate these guys and like human vampire. It's like, well, this guy's been mind controlled, so someone mind controlled it. Oh,
sure, yeah,
does that solve the adventure? No, we just have narrowed this down to everyone with mind control, which is you, me, and everyone we know.
yes, yeah,
But
Fun.
that makes it interesting. You learn something.
yeah.
So
So
Rafferty,
Vampire
It's
is
what's
like
your
better
failing
at that
rule
forward.
then? What's your
Yeah.
favorite too much simulation kind of rule?
And also, I want to clarify that like too much detail is not necessarily the same thing as too much like exceptionalism. Like having
This is true, yeah.
character
They're
sheet,
different.
like
They're
having
they're
to
apples
track
and oranges here.
encumbrance and points and details. You mean like where the world was too realistic and you couldn't. I mean, I
Right.
guess I would build on the everything proof. I mean, you brought up the Traveler thing, where Traveler's infamous for crippling you or killing you in character creation.
Pretty
Um,
good.
uh, yeah, I would say that it's a problem when at some level the game does have to be about the players.
Mhm.
I think a big example I'm usually shooting at are I'm usually shooting complaining about things like Eclipse Phase or Hooks and Dracones, which are these post-human games. They're supposed to be games that take place in the far future, but they have so much lore and so much stuff that's already set up, and they keep emphasizing how pointless you are.
Hmm.
Mm.
Like you can, I really want to emphasize you can be powerful in a simulation. Like you could make a world where like when people talk about like D&D doesn't start until 7th level or whatever. It's like you could have a game where everything you do is repercussions like that. The players just have better numbers than everyone else. The players are just top tier. And that's usually my ideal, where the
Yeah.
players are better at everyone else, but it's still a realistic simulation. And that's my paradox there. Like I'm very much pro. We should live in a world where knowing the rules informs me more about what everything is capable of. Like that's the problem with me. I'll be very pro with that.
Mhm.
I mean, this can be used as an oppressive tool if you're playing a game where like the everything proof under the mythals in Dungeons and Dragons, where they've already thought of anything you could possibly do. And I'm always rebelling against characters like Drizzt and Elminster,
Yeah.
if you're familiar with the lore, like okay, those guys like have really cool powers. Now they have in-lore reasons why they're like that. Apparently, if you're boning the goddess of magic, you get to be immortal. That's how that works, even after she's dead.
Follows.
Okay, you still. I mean, they wrote down all these reasons, and I guess in theory that you could do them. Like I remember, there's Legend of the Five Rings. They have a statement in there that says, "Yeah, we know they got this one guy's got cool samurai powers and cool magic powers, but he's centuries old, so you can't be him." Like they actually just wrote that in the text of one of the books, and it was
Oh.
like,
Right.
okay, and that's an example of like simulationism gone way too far, where not only have they written a whole bunch of stuff, they've also written a whole bunch of stuff and then told you could never do any of this.
All right.
And that's when I get into if there's so much in there that I can't do anything about it and I can't affect it, and it really doesn't affect me because I'm not going to meet the monster.
Wasted effort.
Yeah, then why is this there? And I've seen a lot of the post-human games that have like, here's gazillion bits of lore in this really cool secret society, and it's like, well, not only am I never going to meet these guys, but they're never going to do anything for me. So they, none of this really affects me, and that gets into, I mean, that kind of rolls around the exceptionalist category of if I can't change it and it can't change me, then I don't care about it. And I guess I'm kind of cynical. That's when it starts to roll around on me. Really, there does have to be a happy medium of at some point. At some point, the players are the stars of the story, so they need to have some level of agency. But it also needs to be a level where learning more about what you can do makes you learn more about the world.
Right. It's important to remember we're playing a game, and at some point, the game probably needs to be focused on the players.
Yeah,
so,
I think. Well, I'll just end with one of my favorite quotes from Batman the
one last
Animated
thing.
Series, where the clock tower collapses, and Commissioner Gordon says, "Do you think the Clock King could have survived that?" And Batman's reply is, "I could have survived that." And like that's it. That's all you do. That's the perfect moment. It's kind of like,
Favorite
well,
episode,
I
by the
could,
way.
therefore he could.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Well, that's going to be all for this episode of Notes from the Aleph Them. We go ahead and stream every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel, and you can come join us. We start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty here is the owner and writer of Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com and join us on Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Goros Ironclaw expansion book, where you can engage in your very own pirate adventure. And don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for a game over on startplaying.games as Oracular Pig. And of course, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Now, catch you next time.
Later.